kind of a fun pause, waiting for everybody to get back to their correct pew. Feels like a little bit of returning back to normal. The text that we read tonight for the gospel reading from the Gospel of Matthew is one that we read pretty much every year. And it is always the most difficult text because it goes on at length talking about how we should not be displaying our faith and piety publicly, which is right before we mark these giant black crosses on our forehead and then head out the door. It's just this kind of odd mix, this sense of demonstrating our faith, but the challenge of the reading is to, what is the orientation or what is the energy behind what we're doing? Is the energy behind it to influence people around us so that they think about us differently, that they understand us to be people of faith? Is that the orientation as to why we do that? Or is it strictly oriented towards God, an understanding that our faith is towards God and a faith that is about relationship with God? And I think that's where this text is going, even though it feels a little awkward because it's the one day of the entire church year where we mark ourselves out as Christians. And the text says, whatever you do, don't mark yourself out as Christians. But when we look at the text, though, there's a few things that I think about during the season of Lent. We're beginning this 40-day journey that does not include Sundays, which is another story. But the 40 days that we march along, we begin tonight. Could start any number of ways, right? But we're starting with the imposition of ashes, remembering that we are dust and that we will return to dust. And one of the things that always strikes me is it's a grounding, pun intended, I suppose, a sense of being placed in all of creation in our proper place. That's something I think we struggle with as human beings. We want to kind of shift a little bit over into the Creator's shoes and try and sort things out on our own. And I notice this when we go around in our world, we've scaled everything to us, right? Even if our eyes are closed or the lights are off in our bedroom, we know that the doorknob is about right here, right? A little lower than the light switch, but not a lot. I know for myself, if I reach up to about here, this is about the door frame height, right? We have that sense in us that we have built everything to us, which gives us this sense of control. It gives us this sense of power over things. The idea that we can chart our own course, the idea that we can make the story of our lives roll out the way we expect to have it go. But we know it doesn't always work that way, right? It could be the company shifting in a direction that doesn't bode well for our portfolio. It could be a trip to the doctor's office that ends up being longer than you imagined it was going to be when you went in. There's any number of scenarios that stop us cold, right? Where we realize that we can't just construct or build or make our way into the future the way we want it to be. And suddenly, there is a sense that we are adrift, perhaps. In all the things that are scaled to us, I'll never forget the first time I had the opportunity to go to Sequoia National Park. Being from the Midwest, big trees all come in one size. They're about 50 to 60 feet. They're big in their own way, but you land at Sequoia National Park and you realize that there's a different scale to large. Much, much different scale to large. And you feel very, very small. Even in our faith lives, when we think of travel and various places we go, suddenly we don't have 8-foot ceilings when we travel places. Again, it is a sense of scale, a reminder that we are small in the universe, that we are the creatures and not the Creator. Now, that maybe could lead someone into a sense of despair, a sense of, I'm powerless against things. There's nothing I can do about going forward if I am small. But I don't think that's the way it works either. As we begin this journey of Lent, we are mindful that we know the end of the story. We talk about the gospel, and a colleague of mine from seminary reminds me that the gospel is not that we are saved by grace through faith. The gospel is that Jesus Christ lives. That the end of the story is a story of life. No matter how dark or frail the current chapter we may be in, we know the end of the story, that Christ lives. What does that do for us? Even when things are kind of loose and adrift or scary, it helps us to understand that we know the end of the story. The salvation of all of creation and our own lives to boot is not in our hands, and it is good news. And what do we do with this good news? Is there a sense of hope that can come from that when we aren't consumed with saving our own lives? I've mentioned it before recently, but I've just been taken by a story I saw about the war in Ukraine, that there was this reporter talking to people waiting at the Polish border. And what was fascinating is it took me a couple of minutes to realize that the reporter was on the Polish side of the border, and it was a long line of men waiting to get back into Ukraine, to go home. Is it because there's a sense of hope? A sense that the next chapter is going to be easy? A sense that they have that with their bare hands they can force the future into their own vision? I don't know that that's the case. But a sense that Christ's life means that we too will live. And so as we mark ourselves with ashes tonight, we are mindful that even though we come from the dust, we have hope because Christ lives. And so as we begin this walk, go through every step of it, the easy steps, the not easy steps, the clean steps, the messy steps, knowing that the journey ends at Easter. Amen.